Right, so Labour is sticking to its guns and resolutely repeating that there is no money to lift the two-child benefit cap, which is a debate that is not quieting down as much as Labour might like it to, because they are supposed to be, well, better than the Tories, right? Not proving it on this issue of all issues, and from a money perspective, of course, it is a political choice to not fund this. Well, they can fund defence hikes or fund aid for Ukraine. And there's always the option of a wealth tax if the reality was that Labour wasn't too afraid of scaring off wealthy donors to their party if they did that. It is also appalling optics to be hiking pension pots, as has been announced now, instead of helping get kids out of poverty. But apparently, investing in pension schemes is more attractive than investing in the next generation. That said, there's actually an even worse motivation behind all of this. And it comes down to Keir Starmer and his authoritarianism and his control freakery that is now determined to keep kids in poverty for his own political ends.
If the Labour Party has a moral mission, it has to be to eradicate poverty, especially child poverty. There are families experiencing unnecessary hardship. Rachel mentioned tough decisions. We can fund this if we look at different tax decisions where the wealthiest, with the broadest shoulders, pay for this. We can. We are the 6th largest economy in the world, yet one of the most unequal in the developed world. We can fund this commitment if we want to, and it's a matter of political will. We can uplift 300,000 kids instantly from poverty if we do this.
But I just wonder, she's really clear that she's not going to do it. She's not prepared to put taxes up for this particular idea. And for you then on the left, how hard are you going to push? And are you going to be able to when the government and the leadership has got such a big majority?
Well, this policy is the policy of Labour Party's 11 affiliated unions. It's also the policy of the TUC, which speaks up for 6 million workers. So this is, not a radical demand. In fact, if Rachel decided to put a 2% wealth tax on assets over 10 billion, you could raise 24 billion pounds a year. If you want to equalise capital gains with income rate thresholds, you can raise 16.7 billion. So when we say that there isn't any money to fund this, we're not looking in the right places.
Okay.
Right, so that was a clip of Zara Sultana speaking to Laura Kuenssberg on our show this morning, following an interview Kuenssberg had done with Chancellor of the Exchequer Rachel Reeves in response to Reeves's ongoing claims that they cannot lift kids out of poverty because they can't say where the money is going to come from to do it. And Sultana did a grand job there of pointing several options out to Reeves of all things she could do to raise that money, all of which require increasing taxes, not to pay for the policy. Taxation doesn't pay for anything, but because it effectively reverses government spending, offsets it, destroys money the government prints to spend on other stuff, however you wish to phrase it, to think of it, increased taxation allows the government to print more money to spend on the things we all need without affecting inflation. Government spending is not like a household budget, no matter how many times politicians try to make it look like it is. They can print money, we would get arrested for doing the same thing. The crux is what you raise taxation on, though, and Sultana again pointed out where taxes not just should be levied, but actually must be levied to fix the economy and make it work for all of us. The trouble is, those people taxation needs to be raised on also donate to political parties because they're obscenely wealthy, not least Labour, of course, and that is an investment in this party operating in their interests and not ours. This is why Rachel Reeves can't say how she would raise the money to pay for this cap to be lifted, because she refuses to make the obvious choice, because, well, donations to her party might dry up. No more of those donations perhaps to her own office to pay for staffing costs. That's always a good ruse to list donations under, isn't it? But as much as we can point to what Reeves refuses to deal with, equally we can look at her choices against that backdrop, for what she will finance and is interested in, and ask the question, how do you justify that choice? For instance, The Independent today is running a story titled Chancellor Promises Big Bang for Pensions in Bid to Boost Growth. Now, economic growth, to grow the economy, which isn't infinitely possible on one hand, and I don't much like the term because of that. I prefer to think of the economy in terms of strengthening it, making it more healthy. Labour like to talk a lot about stability. That's another good word. So why not stabilise the economy after the Tories put it on the rocks, for example? Stabilise it for the future, secure it. The word growth is just misleading. However, it is always how the state of the economy is presented to us, isn't it, in terms of how it is growing. So we do have to work to an extent within it in those terms. But however you choose to think of the economy in a healthy sense, making the rich richer doesn't do that whatsoever. Taxing them, though, putting some of their wealth back in government coffers, enabling the government to spend again instead of that money just sitting there doing nothing, well, that's good for the economy. That can pay for stuff that will help the economy, strengthen it, like putting money back into ordinary working class people's hands, taking their kids out of poverty. Because simply spending in the economy always generates a return. So having more money to spend is always going to be good for the economy. Tax revenues, business growth, more jobs come as a result, the beneficial knock-on effects of spending. Don't take a lot of thought to be fairly obvious, do they? So why not do that then? Investing in ordinary people generate a positive economic return. Is it country before party or not? Because not lifting kids out of poverty doesn't come across at all that way. When a wealth tax on the rich, you get ever richer, who are the reason we live in the 6th richest economy in the world, but only because they hold all of the wealth of this country, it seems. As Zara Sultana also pointed out, we live in one of the most unequal of societies, so how about some proper levelling up? How about some meaningful redistribution of wealth to kickstart an economic revolution? Numbers would be fantastic for Reeves, wouldn't they, economically? But party donations come first. There's no other logical conclusion to come to, frankly, is there? But let's move on to what Reeves will spend on, this independent story, because it seems like Reeves can find money for pensioners, but not kids in poverty on the face of it, whose parents may well be in work at that, but such low-paid work that they are on benefits too. In-work benefits, though, and pensions, well, the state pension is treated as a benefit as well, whether you agree with that terminology or that treatment or not. Big boost for pensions, though, not for working class benefits, and benefit reforms coming down the line doesn't come across as reassuring at all for working class claimants who have already endured 14 years of Tory misery, even, does it? But it's not quite as straightforward as that, though. We know Reeves refuses to spend. We know Starmer and Reeves have come into power looking at how they can get the private sector to invest instead of government, and that even extends to pensions. Now, despite the state pension being treated as a benefit, as aforementioned, private pensions are, of course, more akin to an investment that ebbs and flows depending on what the pension scheme you are part of invests in. Pension pots, essentially, therefore, amongst various other details in an upcoming pensions bill, such as consolidation of smaller pension pots and rejigging around of pension frameworks, all nasally banker kind of language, are going to get a boost by being used to invest in the rebuilding of Britain and everything in society that has fallen by the wayside under the Tories. That will generate a great return if successful, but as always seems to be the case with this penny-pinching Chancellor Reeves, it relies on the private sector to deliver, and instead of risking government money which can always cover the fallout if things go bad, as outlined above, they can print more money, it'll be your pension savings that go down instead if matters go south. Now, there are a multitude of different things that this could be invested in to deliver the growth without spending Labour keep harping on about. Do you really think everything will go well, though? Even if most of it does, and the government gets a great economic boost, great numbers, can jeer and boo at the Tories for making their plans work and making the Tory economic figures look as rubbish as they actually were, not everything may work out. And if your pension was invested in that, you might not see the benefit others do. And pension returns all of a sudden become akin to a bit of a lottery, depending on what was invested in. Labour estimates an overall increased return in pension pots averaging around £11,000. So that's a decent hike, if it pays off. Coming back to the two-child benefit cap here now, though, with all this private money, your pension pots being used to rebuild Britain, even less money is being used by the government. Therefore, there is actually even less of an excuse to not lift kids out of poverty. We can make the old argument about spending choices again. I've pointed to the $3 billion being given to Ukraine as something that, although you might consider just and appropriate, if we have kids in poverty, how can we actually afford to do that then? But actually, there's a more sinister reason behind Labour not lifting the two-child benefit cap, and this has got nothing at all to do with money, and everything to do with Keir Starmer and his ego and his power trip. Some of the loudest voices calling for the lifting of this cap, aside from those coming from the likes of the Green Party, independent MPs and others in the opposition benches, has been from Labour backbenchers on the left of the party, what's left of them. Starmer sees everything, it would appear, as a war when it comes to stuff the left want to see delivered. They want the two-child benefit cap lifted. Therefore, Starmer is digging his heels in to not do it for that very reason. Despite 60% of the British public believing the cap should be scrapped, Starmer will not do it at this point, because it would be like backing down to the left, and being only 2 weeks into his premiership, Starmer thinks it will make him look weak if he does what they want already. This comes down to a fight over welfare spending, and Starmer is hell-bent on not losing it to what remains of his own left wing. This could get taken to a vote, and if he decides to oppose it to keep kids in poverty, that Sir Kids Starver moniker is going to be shouted at him ever more loudly. But he'd likely win such a vote given his overwhelming majority, and also the fact so many of his more loyal MPs, as so many were picked to be exactly that, would back him in that vote in the belief he will cut this all later on. He will scrap this benefit cap later on at a time of his own choosing. But that then becomes his arbitrary choice, his decision on timing as to when it best suits him. And meanwhile, kids continue to go hungry because he cannot stand the thought of having to go back down on something. And given it was something he originally said he would do anyway, he only has himself to blame for where he now is on that. But it's kids that are going to suffer, not him. Labour spending is always going to be about making Starmer look tough and involving private sector funding wherever possible, begging the question when we look at consequences such as the examples discussed here as to who this country is supposedly working in the interests of. Because I'm not really seeing any change from the Tories, just a change in how the rich are going to be placated and how we will end up getting shafted. Meanwhile, Starmer's desperation to look tough, despite sounding like an accountant with oversized adenoids, has seen him crack down on protest in the most abhorrent way. His attitude towards protest outside of Parliament, a possible reflection of his aversion to the protests of left-wing MPs begging him to deal with child poverty, as the most heavy-handed sentence for non-violent protest just got handed out to climate protesters, an issue Starmer is known to have no patience for. He hates tree huggers as an example. He's told us this before, reminding us again already that this is not a man who listens to the concerns of others outside of his circle. The makings of a truly poor leader. Details of which can be found on this video recommendation here, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next video. Cheers, folks.